Good morning. Great Bible Truths, Day 68, the visit of the wise men, Matthew 2, 1 through 23. Now Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod. Behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard it, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he asked, Where would the Christ be born? They said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written through the prophet, You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are in no way least among the princes of Judah. For out of you shall come a governor, who shall shepherd my people Israel. Herod secretly called the wise men and learned from them exactly the time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child. When you find him, bring me word so that I also may come and worship him. They, having heard the king, went their way, and behold, the star, which they saw in the east, went before them until it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. They came into the house and saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. Opening their treasures, they offered to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Being warned in a dream that they shouldn't return to Herod, they went back to their own country another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. He arose and took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked or tricked by the wise men, he was exceedingly angry, and sent out and killed all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in the surrounding countryside from 2 years old and under, according to the exact time which he had learned from the wise men. Then that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, saying, A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children. She wouldn't be comforted, because they are no more. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph, saying in Egypt, Arise and take the young child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel. For those who sought the young child's life are dead. He arose and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Being warned in a dream, he withdrew into the region of Galilee, and came and lived in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken through the prophets, He will be called a Nazarene. So very interesting story we see here. We see a very tragic story. We see a very miraculous story. We see happy themes, sad themes, the pain, joy, all those things wrapped into such a short story. Wickedness, evil, goodness, right? It's an amazing one. Let's look at the questions, and then I want to point out something interesting here. I don't know if the questions are going to even get to it. I haven't looked at it yet this morning, but when we look at this story, there's a book called Reading Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, written by a Middle Eastern pastor. And he made an interesting point here of the Magi, which we traditionally, now I don't even want to say traditionally, I would say more modernly, have attributed to Persians coming from the east, the wise men. He makes the case that many of the church fathers, and the way that the word is used there to a Middle Easterner, would convey the idea that these wise men were actually Arabs, like Bedouin shepherds out there who, remember, not only did the Zoroastrians, the Persians, that's what a lot of people think the Magi are, follow the stars, but like the proto-Muslims, because Islam wasn't around yet, but the groups that would later become Islamic he argues is this group here, and comes and worships Jesus. On top of that, Christ flees into Egypt. Egypt is traditionally the enemy of God, and yet Christ goes there to hide from Israel. Think of the irony in this, right? Christ has to flee Israel, his own people, and go to Egypt, the enemy of God, to be safe. There's a lot going on here, right? But I think if it is true that those Magi are Arabs and not Persians, and even if it isn't, the fact that Christ flees to Egypt really shows God doing something different here, right? And I think it makes sense, one, that there would be Arabs, because it's like a day's journey versus like a year's journey. So traditionally, again, maybe not traditionally, but in our modern tradition, people think the Magi showed up when Jesus is like probably 2 or 3, because it would have taken them so long to travel there. The text doesn't really say, but it very well could be that they arrived there still when he was a very young baby, because the journey would not be far. When the idiom there from the east would be from like the Jordan area. So it's amazing here that if it's true that you really have these two groups that have been warring for the last 2,000 years, both Jews and Arabs. And what you'd have here is Jewish shepherds worshiping Christ, and then, Arabs coming in and worshiping Christ. And it's a beautiful picture that the enmity between man is really, can be broken in Christ. For there at his birth and childhood, right, they worshiped him together, and he even flees to the Arabs that protect him, and his own people seek to kill him because they're afraid of his kingship. So there's, like I said, a lot. It's mind-blowing when we really think about what's kind of going on there. But let's get to these questions for time's sake. How did the chief priests know where the Messiah Christ was to be born? They looked at the scriptures here, the prophecies of Christ. Number 2, what prophecy was fulfilled when Joseph took his family to Egypt? The prophecy where it says, "Out of Egypt I will call my son." 3, what had the prophet Jeremiah said concerning the brutal murder of the innocent infant boys? That they would be, Rama would be weeping and mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, but she would not be comforted because they would be no more. And that's a very hard story, right? To see these young children just be killed by Herod because he's afraid of his kingship being taken. And he dies a few years later, and you got to think, didn't he know he wasn't going to last till this kid was old enough to take his power? Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was just saturated with anger and power. Or maybe he was afraid of his lineage, right? He wanted to pass that on to his children, and this king would take his lineage and take his pride and take his legacy. That's very possible. Either way, it was completely wicked. What men will do for power, what men will do in an attempt to keep power, we see it today. It's completely wicked. And Christ sets the example, saying, when he tells us, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. But it is not to be like that with you. For the greater shall serve the lesser. And I'm paraphrasing here, right? But ultimately, that who wants to be greatest among you needs to serve. That's how power is shown, by servitude, by laying one's life down. This is greatness and power, modeling the grace and mercy of God for others, not with an iron fist, but with a sacrificial hand. 4, what prophecy was fulfilled when Joseph settled in Nazareth? That was the last one we looked at here. It says, and it came and he lived in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken through the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene. So there's a lot that had to happen. When we really think of, like, he had to be called out of Egypt, and he had to be a Nazarene, but born in Bethlehem, and it probably would have been like, how is all those things going to happen? Right? That's not going to happen. In that day and age, people don't travel, people don't go all over. They usually stick within a few miles, 2 miles, I think it is, of their general location of where they're born. They don't really travel far out of that. And yet Jesus does, and fulfills all these prophecies in a way that was probably mind-blowing, right? Wow, I can't believe how God brought that together. But even as we look at the greatness of the story and the prophecy fulfilled, we got to remember that even in God's plan, right? Even in this working that God does, evil men try to thwart it. And when evil men try to thwart it, it brings about pain and suffering and sin that brings about death, bondage, and everything that's ugly. So we have a choice, right? We either go with the plan of God and bring about beauty and glory and praise and goodness, or we try to thwart the plan of God, which will bring pain, suffering, and death. We either listen to the Lord like Joseph, or we fight against him like Herod. I pray that we listen like Joseph. We'll see you guys tomorrow.